Hi everyone, it's an absolute pleasure to have you all here. Welcome to the Grace Louise Presents, or Louise and Grace Presents, and this is specifically a conversation, so we've titled this the Adoptee Spotlight Series, because we're really passionate. Both myself and Grace are adopted, and all our panel speakers are adopted, and we were really keen to kind of really feature those voices more during National Adoption Month. And this talk is really for everyone. If you're adopted, thinking of adoption, interested about it, or literally just want to find out more. And so thank you so much for taking some of your Saturday to spend it with us. I am really excited to have a great set of speakers from very different backgrounds, different experiences, but with one thread in common of adoption. And so I am going to start straight away with the conversation. Again, to welcome everyone who has joined us to listen, and thank you to our speakers, and thank you to my partner in all of this, Grace, who we have tag teamed beautifully to bring this whole project together. So it's just really exciting to see it come to life. Firstly, I wanted to obviously welcome our speakers, Tara, Ebony, Amy, and Milagros. And I would like to, we've got a series of questions that the speakers are gonna take it in turns to answer. Please feel free to Tara, Ebony, Amy, and Milagros to chip in. It doesn't have to be like a beautiful, succinct order. Just kind of, if you feel that there's something you want to say, please do share. Yeah. Okay. So I would like to start. Obviously, we're going straight into quite a big conversation, but I'd like to kind of see how you're doing and how you're looking after your well-being during lockdown, considering especially lockdowns being extended. So basically a short kind of how you're feeling.
I feel great. I love lockdown. So for me, I'm very introverted. So having a reason and an excuse to not have to go anywhere is absolutely amazing for me. But I know that's probably not the norm.
I would say exactly the same, to be honest. As a natural introvert, I'm enjoying it. It's not been without challenges, but yeah, I am enjoying it.
Yeah, I feel no problems with it. I'm fine.
And I know this question is a bit of a big one, because I've had it every time someone asks to summarize my life. I'm like, where do you want me to start? But if you could summarize it in some sort of like movie trailer, so people kind of get a sense of who you are and your adoption story, how would you summarize your experience?
So the way I would summarize it is I've got a very creative approach into understanding my adoption story. I've always felt it important to engage and to develop my ideas, opinions, and experiences within my birth country, and obviously within my adopted country, which is the UK. For me, it's all about primarily combining my two identities and becoming like a whole kind of person. So it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey.
I was going to say I don't really have a lot to say in this one. I think if my life was a movie trailer, it'd be pretty mundane. I'm not sure it's a movie anyone would want to watch. I was adopted when I was 9 months old, and for me, I think I've had a fairly normal childhood. Yeah, it's quite boring.
I'm sure it's not boring. I think sometimes when it's our own story, we kind of just see it as that's our story and that's our lives. But often when someone else hears it, it's sometimes different. So I'm sure your story, I know your story is not boring, but yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, so I did they always do like 2 people or whatever. So I put 1 girl, 3 adoptions, 1 international from South Korea, and 2 domestic from in Oregon, America. Survives it all before the age of 8 and takes on life's adventure head on as if she explores the world, traveling and living as an expat until she discovers how to express herself as the universal Asian. So That's very brief, but.
No, I love it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, my adoption is very simple. I feel anyway. So I feel like it would be one of those real life documentaries that ends in good, like a very positive triumph documentary, life documentary.
So thank you everyone for kind of sharing kind of the introduction of today's talk to kind of ease everything in. I'd like to kind of now go a little bit deeper and ask you kind of, what does adoption mean to you, and has that changed as you've grown through what I would deem us all as adults? We're all in our very, and so has that changed as you've progressed from like childhood to adulthood?
Okay, so I'm a proven adoptee. I was adopted at the age of 16 months to the UK. I am considered, my family is an international family, so they were not brought up or raised in the UK, and they came from the States to the UK. I have 8 siblings, so some of us are adopted and some of us are their biological children. And I'm like one of the first Latin American adoptees to be adopted to the UK. So your question is very profound, very depthful. As a, I've always felt that, and there are lots of losses and lots of gains in the word of adoption. The way that I've sort of dealt with my adoption is the fact that I've realized that I had to sort of take control of my own journey, take control of my story. I didn't have any information about my background. So my parents adopted me, but we didn't know who my parents were. We didn't know really why I was adopted. So that lack of structural identity really had an impact on me. Coupled with the fact that I've been raised in London with like a very low percentage of Latin American / indigenous population within the UK. So I had never really encountered another adoptee before. So I think there's like many levels in understanding like how my journey has changed. First, it's about taking control of your story. And that for me, that was basically going back to Peru at the age of 18 and trying to understand what it actually means to be a Peruvian as an adoptee in the context of Peru. And then developing my skills within Peru as a basic, first like as a tourist, but then sort of as the more times I went to Peru, I felt comfortable about my history. And then I began to seek other kind of like experiences. So I've taught in Peru, I've volunteered, I've worked, I've traveled all over Peru. So the way that it changes is, for me, it's depending upon the type of experiences that I have in my birth country, and the way that I seek to engage in my story. And then also in the terms of within England, it's like interacting with other adoptees within England or outside of the United Kingdom. So I think that it's like it's a balance really of many things. So who I am at 18, who I was at 18 and who I was at 25 and who I am today is completely different, because it's a journey, just like how we grow and change.
Does any of the speakers want to add to that, or add their own perspective and thoughts?
I would say for me, I know sort of every adoption is unique, and some are smoother than others. And I know we're going to touch on this word later on, but I think I've been quite lucky in some respects. Adoption has given me a normal family life, a loving family and a happy childhood. I've always known that I'm adopted. There was no sort of big reveal moment or any sort of shock or trauma. And I do know that that's not always the same for everyone. But for me, adoption is normality. Some of my friends didn't even know I was adopted until I mentioned I was doing this. It's part of who I am, but it's only one piece of the puzzle, and it's not necessarily always at the forefront for me.
I don't really, like I was saying, thinking to myself, I struggled kind of with the question, because I don't have a meaning for like, what does adoption mean? It just is. There's no question. I never look like anybody around me. So it was quite obvious that I was adopted, and so it's just life. I think that what changed maybe was my acceptance of it. So even though it was obvious, I tried to ignore it or become more white or fit into more of the white community around me. And then as an adult, when I haven't lived back in the States now since, I don't know, 20 some years. And I think part of that is because I feel more not adopted, or the title of it, when I'm not there. So it's kind of, I accept that I'm adopted, but then I don't put myself back into a situation where it's kind of in my face all the time. So.
No, both of those points are really interesting, just because, like, a lot of the time is a part of your identity, but it is not your identity, because we do so many other things in our lives and have so many different things that have shaped us into who we are, but is also an important part, but not the sole part. So this is a conversation that I personally find very, a question I personally find very interesting, but I think all the questions I find very interesting, because I've had very insightful conversations with each of you to really kind of shape this, all the questions I'm asking you. So do you feel that British adoption and international adoption is discussed differently, and why do you think that? And in terms of within the UK, is British adoption discussed differently than international adoption? What are your thoughts and reflections on that?
I certainly would think this is a big subject and something that I feel very passionate about. I think that we're in a country that is one of the lowest amount of adoptees in the world. And so we don't really have a long history with international adoption as opposed to domestic adoption. A lot of the resources around adoption has always come from the domestic arena, transracial or like just normal adoption. So a lot of the adoption agencies are more experienced with dealing with domestic adoptees, and they have a lot of resources. So for example, if you want to go and search for your family, or if you have any support groups, it's very hard to encounter any support groups that are primarily for international adoptees. And we have our own different type of situations and like questions that are very particular to the environment of international adoption. And at least for me, I mean, I didn't meet another international adoptee until about 10 years ago. And I was living and raised in London, so it's not like I was living in a small town. I have really tried to search high and low for international adoptees from an international perspective, but it's always been very challenging. We also don't have as long as with resources, there's not a lot of research into our experiences as opposed to domestic. So I don't know if you're aware, but the UK never really had statistics of how many international adoptees were from the UK until 1993. And they started to record it from the 1993. So we have really no understanding how many international adoptees are prior to 1993. And I know I was adopted before 1993, and so was my brother. So we're really not we actually are not a statistic in the international arena. I think that's really important, because when you develop policies and when you develop resources, you have to know how many are there and what kind of groups are present in the UK landscape. And I also know that, for example, if you're, the current parents of children of today who are adopting, they've had to really fight for children to get premium placing for children. So all children who were fostered or adopted into the UK get automatic funding for an educational place. But this was never entitled for international adoptees. So currently, I think 2 years ago, they really had to fight for that place to have that equality between adoptees and domestic adoptees, international adoptees. So we've never really been given the same kind of light and resources and understanding. And I think that's a really important thing to understand, how the UK is so different to America or Canada or to Europe, where they've had such a long history and lots of research around the subject matter.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really insightful, and I think there's so much research around adoption that that it's very valuable for kind of like adoption agencies and even just anyone really to kind of really understand the context behind adoption. Ebony, I see that you're back with us, which is good. I didn't know whether you wanted to come in next with this question in terms of whether you feel that British adoption, international adoption are discussed differently within the overall arena of adoption, and why do you think that is?
Can you guys finally hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, I feel like it is, but I also just feel like they're both not discussed. I was adopted in Britain by a British family, so for me growing up, I didn't really hear about adoption like that at all. So it was just the conversation that I would have within my family, or like through TV programs or movies. That's how I really found out about international adoption and adoption in general, but there wasn't a lot of conversation for me. So it was just, as I've got older, I've had to figure it out and learn more and gain more information.
That's interesting, because I can't recollect any movies around adoption. The only thing I can crystal clear remember is being really hooked on Tracy Beaker, but Tracy Beaker's focuses on fostering going into adoption. But I used to always daydream about that whole concept of kind of like finding your forever family, or you know, having that real idea of like the perfect parent out there is like looking for you, and one day you'll meet them. I was just obsessed with Tracy Beaker, just for her end story rather than her time in care, and just the idea that you can find your like find a home disregarding your background as a child and everything. So yeah.
I think that's an interesting slant on British adoption as well. I mean, I don't have experience of international adoption, so it's not something that I can speak on, but I think in the last few decades, certainly the conversation has shifted a little bit in terms of adoption within the UK, but there was sort of stereotypes and taboos, sort of problem children, people in children's homes like Tracy Beaker and that kind of thing. But also sort of going back further, sort of people born out of wedlock, and you know that sort of stigma associated, and people didn't necessarily talk about adoption, and they felt a lot of shame with it. So I think it's good that conversations like this are happening and people can be more open.
Mm. Tara, did you want to input?
Well, I don't know anything about the British adoption, how it's.
But in terms of on the international adoption side.
I mean, from the US perspective, I guess, I mean, when Louise and I were talking about in America, we have these camps for Holt people, adoptees from Holt. And so when I was 8, you know, I joined that kind of community. And so being able to talk about being adopted and kind of, it wasn't like part of my regular conversation, but from 8 to, I don't know when, I guess even now, it was part of my conversation in a year for a week, where we would get together and we had a community of people who look like us, who were having experiences like us, that we could at least kind of commiserate together about what, you know, was happening. But I never knew any non-international adoptees. It was never, you know, wasn't talked about. So unless it was in your face, we didn't talk about being adopted, or but even amongst like I knew, I think 2 other Korean adoptees in the same area where I lived, but we didn't talk to each other. We didn't talk about being adopted together because we were too busy trying not to be adopted. So it was kind of, you know, we kind of ignored each other and pretended like we didn't exist to each other's instead of, you know, kind of banding together. So yeah, I mean, I think it's taboo across the boards for whatever, you know, the origins of it, or, you know, and then as the adoptees, I kind of feel like we pay the price for it. And I don't know why, I can't pinpoint the reason for it per se. But yeah, so.
Yeah, I can really echo with some of the things that you've all said about just that you kind of want to kind of in some ways blend in, but then also you also want to like have your experiences recognized. And my experience with like being especially once we got older, and my sister is biologically my parents and my parents are white, that actually it was obvious that we were adopted, because people always ask that question, but I think sometimes we did try and like get them to not ask that question, because it wasn't just like, oh, you're adopted, then it was like the 60 questions that came after it, because people always want to dig a little bit further. So it's a hard one, especially whilst growing up, in terms of navigating conversations with people from the outside world, because you just want to like you just want to fit in, and sometimes you don't want it to be like stamped on your forehead as soon as you go out, as soon as you leave your house. So it's it's a complex one. This kind of leads us quite well into our next question in terms of the different impacts the adoption can have as an adoptee. And this one is focusing on mental health and well-being, which I think isn't always talked about very much, because there's always that that, you know, like, oh my gosh, your life just got sorted because you got adopted, but there are mental health impacts around it. So I really love to know from each of you, in terms of, do you think that your adoption has impacted your mental health? And that obviously can be both good or bad, but some of the things that it could include is anything with around separation anxiety, depression, PTSD. It's going a bit deep, but I think these kind of conversations are really important, because I think sometimes in the outside world you may perceive like, oh my god, like your life is so great, and it can be, yes, but I think there's also those mental health isn't as visible in terms of how you experience that as a journey. So I'd really love to know the each of your thoughts on that.
I'd say my short answer is yes, absolutely. I have suffered with depression in the past, and equally, you know, for quite a long time I was uncomfortable with being alone. So I guess you can call that a bit of sort of separation anxiety. It's hard to pinpoint, you know, is this down to being adopted, or is it just life? Because, you know, life is a factor as well. But yeah, one of the things that I wanted to get across today, that even with a loving family, a happy childhood, I do still think that my adoption has impacted negatively on my mental health. Yeah.
I would say the same thing. I dealt with anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, suicide. I really struggled in my younger years, like when I was in primary school. I found it the hardest because, for instance, like me and my mum don't look alike. Even though she's black, we don't have the same features. Or my sister or my sisters are both mixed. My brother is black, but they all have the same mum and we have different parents. So people would ask me questions like, why don't I look like them? And my response would be, oh, we just have different dads. So that would be it. But deep down, I knew that I was adopted. So that would always make it a little bit harder for me to understand and relate to other people. And I think that's also affected my relationships with other people, like connecting with other kids as well. I would also struggle with that. But it wasn't until I got into college and I went to a group called Talk Adoption with other kids who are also adopted and understood what I was going through, and we all had the same kind of understanding. That's where I could kind of open up and let all my feelings be bare, I guess, to a certain extent. But it wasn't until I started going to therapy and had a deeper understanding of why I felt the way that I felt, that's when I was able to deal with adoption and my emotions and how to connect with people in general and build a better relationship. And I would say now I'm in the best space I've been in for the longest time, because I've been able to deal with those emotions and understand it and come to terms with being adopted. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really, I think we just don't hear that side, that kind of really raw. But yeah, we thank you for sharing. I don't have any elaborate words to add, but just thank you for sharing. Does anybody else have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think for me, it's about understanding the sense of loss. So it's, for me, I think that's where it comes from, sense of loss. How do you articulate your sense of loss, your sense of place, your sense of belonging in the world? And for me, it's not really manifested in any particular action or feeling per se, but I always knew that there was a sense of loss within me. So for me, I always saw, I don't know why, because I saw it as a very logical thing. I saw it like, okay, I'm adopted. Where am I from? Peru. Okay, I am from like an indigenous background, from like the Quechuan background. Okay, so how am I going to connect all the dots? And so for me, I think traveling to Peru was like my therapy. And I mean, I didn't know what I was going to exactly do in Peru. It's not, but it was the experiences that I had within my birth country. Getting to feel secure in your, in a place that you're actually originally from. That's where your heritage is. That's from where my DNA is from. So I think for me, it's really helped me to go back to Peru. So I've gone back to Peru now 14 times. And and actually the reason why I've gone back is a bit of many things. It allows me to reflect and to address all the things that I need to address. It allows me to structural like to understand like who I am, and to put all the jigsaw puzzles of who I am, so that when I go back to London, I feel a lot better about who I am. So that's how I've always dealt with it, by seeking to know and wanting to know more about my birth country.
Thank you, and I can completely resonate with just the reconnecting with who you are, and just that connection of where you, like, your birthplace, and just I had it in my teens, where I hit a point that actually me not knowing who I was, like, deeply truly, was actually stopping so much of my life. And sometimes you need to, like, go search those answers, and just kind of understand yourself deeper, so you can really kind of thrive, I'd say, to be honest, in life. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Has everyone had a chance to answer that one?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm with Amy, as in a short answer is yes. And I mean, the longer answer is I was adopted 3 times, which is fairly rare for international adoptees, especially. So I was adopted first from Korea to a family, and then my first family decided they didn't want to keep me. And then I was adopted twice more in the domestic system. And so, of course, that all happened before I was 8 years old. So there's no doubt that there's going to be some issues connected. And it didn't really, I mean, probably, of course, with the teenage angst, I had issues then. But I always say that my adoptive father, my father now, is my guardian angel. So he kind of helped me through a lot. He's growing up, he was the one I talked to the most about what was going on. But then when I went to university, I was on my own, and I had an early midlife crisis. I think you can call it midlife then, but basically I had no idea what I was supposed to do with myself because nobody was telling me what to do. I didn't have to make my decisions or act a certain way based on the people around me. And I had to really start to figure out who I was and what sort of decisions I wanted to make. So that kind of began my, I don't know if you call it self-awareness journey, but I went through, I guess you call it PTSD, because the early families I went through physical abuse, sexual abuse, mental abuse, but whatever I have within me to kind of figure out how to live life, it doesn't keep me from living life. But of course, there's ups and downs through growth, and so yeah. So I think that I still do therapy regularly. Online therapy's my savior, and I think that honestly, I think everyone should do therapy, whether you're adopted or not adopted. I think it's just a healthy way to be. I found meditation and yoga, which meditation has definitely saved my life. So, yeah.
Thank you, Tara. Louise, I just wanted to cut in that, sorry if I get your name incorrect. Is it Agata? She has said that the speakers are talking about depression. Do you think something might have been handled differently, e.g. Psychological support should have been given to you at some point, or you should have been contacted with other adoptees, which is really similar to what Tara said. I was just thinking what the other speakers were also thinking about that.
Yeah, I would say like psychological help, support should be given in the early stages of adoption, only because as a child or a young person, trying to figure out why you've been taken from one place to another is always going to be difficult, and the transition is always going to be hard. And so that support should be there. Sometimes it's given, and then because the system thinks that you're okay or you're doing well, they take it away, but they're not realizing that it's still going to be there. You're still going to have the problems, but they're just, because you're a child or a young person, you're able to cope with it better, or you're seen to see like that you're able to cope with it better, but you're not. You're just adapting to your environment, so that makes it seem like you don't need that help or support. But yeah, it definitely should be there. And as far as connecting with other adoptees, again, it should be a thing, only if that young person or child or whoever wants it, so they have that connection and that community in a sense where they can go to other kids who understand what you're going through. Because I could talk to anybody and tell them that I'm adopted, but they're never going to understand, they're never going to relate. So just having that would definitely make it easier.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I think as part of like the adoption process as an older child, that it's required for you to go to counseling. But I knew I was in counseling when I went. So I knew that if I said the right things and I acted the right way, that I would be okay. So I would say that it's better maybe not to know that you're going to counseling as a child, just because I think I was always trying to figure out how to fit in and not stand out so that I didn't get moved again, or so that, you know, I could just be ignored and then I wouldn't be removed. So probably the best thing for me was the Holt camps, which, I mean, I know for the British audience that camp in America is like the thing, but I really think that was probably one of the best things that I had, was that we could sit around and, like I said, we could talk about the things that were happening to us, the things people would say to us, that may have been better kind of therapy than an actual counselor.
I totally get that. One thing, I didn't go to therapy because I didn't think that people were more experienced with international adoption here. I don't think they have enough experience with that. And also, like you said, Tara, I feel like speaking to another adoptee is far more beneficial. Last summer, I went to an adoption camp in the USA, and I went to the Latin American Heritage Camp. And I was just imagining what it would have been like if I was an 8-year-old girl going to that camp and experiencing experiencing the activities, getting to know the adoptee communities. And I was just thinking about like that. Imagine if we had that in the UK. Imagine if we had all that kind of resources that they do. My experience would have been totally different. There are pros and cons to adoptee camps, as I was reflecting, on my way back home to the UK. And sometimes, with anything that we're so used to, people don't realize that that's so special that sometimes it's taken for granted. And also, there's also, I feel that, speaking from my perspective, is that we can think that those adoption camps are so good that we might not look anywhere else. So there's a danger where we just sort of rely on adoption camps. So I think that's my reflective and critical brain. I was just thinking, but I totally think that I wish I had gone to an adoptee camp, and I wish sometimes that my parents had stayed in the USA, because I felt like I had been deprived of a lot of adoption contextual experiences within the USA as opposed to the UK.
I think a lot of the
Sorry, Louise, you go first.
No, I was going to say, a lot of the things that you seem to have all covered is about that kind of like peer support, but that sounds more in the adult terms rather than when you're a child, but that kind of connecting with the people with the same lived experience. And I went to a centre for fostered and adoptive children, and we never sat and talked about, oh, you're adopted, what's your story? But it was just nice to know that other people understood. So you didn't have to do a whole explanation, or that you didn't have like pity eyes and then like, you're adopted, oh, your parents have died, this kind of thing. And so I think sometimes it helps to be in a space or in a safe space where you can kind of be yourself without your adoption being such a huge badge on you. But at the same time, if there are moments that you need to deal with your adoption, like you're processing bits of your adoption, that people you'll say, I remember with my therapist, my therapy sessions, I used to say things like, oh, this is how I feel. And I used to feel so like cautious of saying it. And then she was like, Louisa, it makes sense. And I was like, really? And so sometimes you need those spaces where people can really validate your experience, and also celebrate it as well. So yeah, I've never been to an adoption camp, and I think up until I spoke with you, Milagros, I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't I've heard of like Girl Scout camps, all these different camps there is in the US, but never an adoption one. I don't would it have been, I don't know if you would, it's hard to know if you haven't experienced it to know what you've missed out on, but the idea sounds good, just for that kind of bringing people together. So Grace, yours.
There was another similar question from Grace, who is also an adoptee, and she said, relating to this, how did you get out of the adoption fog, and what happened to get past it? We've covered a lot, haven't we, from counselling and therapy, and the different camps, as well as speaking to other adoptees. What other things have helped you get out of that fog?
I think the word fog is it, because I was reflecting on the word fog, because somebody asked me, like, when did you get out of the fog? And I was like, I don't know if I really was ever in a fog. And I mean that insincerely, because I've always wanted to go back to my birth country. My parents always spoke about Peru in a very positive way, and they always said from the age of 6, it's something that you need to do, it's something that you have to do. Until you go back, you will never know who you are. So this was from the age of 6, like 5. Yes, I felt lost. So knowing that my parents felt that there was a great need and emphasis to go back to my country, and then feeling the loss, it was very much like, I don't know if I ever was, but I do believe that until I actually went back to my birth country at the age of 18, I went back for 4 months for the first time. And I truly then realized like what my parents were saying about understanding who I was going back, and then understanding my loss. So it sort of like came together, it submerged together. And then I realized that after the 4 months that I'm never ever going to not go back to Peru, and that Peru is going to be just as important as my life in the UK. And I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to combine my Peruvian like experience and then my Peruvian life together. I'm going to make it like into one. And so I then decided to go back to Peru every year or every 2 years. And I don't know how I did it, but I did it. I've been back 14 times. I've gone anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months. I've also took a profession such as teaching, where I've been given 6-week vacation in the summer. So that really helped me to get to that goal, of combining my passion, which is really like exploring my adoption journey. So I think what it is like understanding, for me, it was all about, okay, what do I want to do? I want to know Peru better. How am I going to do that? By going back to Peru and by reading about books regarding Peru and adoption. So that's basically my journey.
Thank you for that. I'm gonna move on to the next question. That was I think we took, I'm glad that we spent the time on this question, because it's a really important one. In general, mental health and well-being is an important conversation, but I think specifically in terms of within this section, within this conversation, my next question is about kind of going in terms of like you as adults, and in terms of when you've often like, and I found it, even me personally, that our ability to navigate adult relationships is often formed during our early years, or when we're early years in terms of like infant and childhood and growing up. Do you feel that your adoption has influenced or shaped your both platonic and intimate relationships? So that could be family, close friends, partners. Has that had an influence in both in a positive way or in a maybe a more challenging way?
I'd say yes, again. I can't necessarily pinpoint it all to being adopted. But, I mentioned sort of previously sort of experiencing sort of separation anxiety. And I think that I've definitely noticed a pattern to my relationships as an adult, both sort of romantic and platonic. I think some of my behaviour in the past has been a bit self-destructive, although in the moment it feels a bit self-preservation. I find myself thinking that there's an inevitability that people are going to leave, and therefore push them away, kind of. And I think that I kind of feel like I'm protecting myself, and that if I'm having sort of control over that situation, that maybe I can handle it a little bit better. It's something I've learned to to not do over time. But I think I'd also say that it's been hard to let people be close and to allow myself to be vulnerable as well.
Yeah, I feel the same as Amy. I would say I really struggled, but I think again with like the adoption system of, I was in care before I was adopted, so I would always ask like social workers if I was going home yet, and they would say yes. And so when you hear that as a kid that you're going home and then you never go home, your trust in people is lost. And so it took me a long time to find that trust again, and trust that people are going to stick to their word and be around and stay around. So it took a long time to build it, but once I did, and it's only now that I'm able to do it and able to trust and have relationships and feel like I can let my guard down with people, that it's changed. So yeah, I feel the same.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I developed my mantra of everyone's an asshole first, and then they work their way backwards to being somebody I can like. So I basically, I might not be friends with everyone because I just assume they're gonna leave. I think I've lived as an expat since my 20s, and I think that a little bit of that has been because of my early start, moving around a lot and not putting down roots anywhere. So when I was 8, I found my family and I stayed with them, but I always knew that I would never live near my family. And now they, live halfway around the world, and I've always lived this kind of expat life, traveling around. And by nature, then people leave. And so it's easy then to have an excuse to not have really close friends or to not make an effort to make close friends. And so we've just recently moved to France, and I'm really kind of like forcing myself, we're going to live here, and I'm trying to force myself to like go out and make proper friends. But the other issue I have is because my early adoptive experiences, my adoptive mothers were kind of the source of my angst, I struggle to have female friendships. I get along great with men, and I connect better with guys, but obviously I want to have girlfriends, so I'm trying harder to get myself out there and to make friends with women. But it's, yeah, I mean, it everything plays into my current state, whether I want it to or not. It's just, that's the fact.
Thank you everyone for sharing that, because I think it's for me, I really thought I had dealt with a lot of my adoption trauma or life experience when I went through therapy as a teenager, did all my tricks to go back home and all this kind of thing. And it's only when I went into what was my most long-term committed serious relationship that I was like, oh my goodness, we did not cover this in therapy, but there was so much things that unraveled that I kind of didn't, as you said, like, as you said, sorry, like that you're kind of so used to people nearly leaving, you kind of push them away. You don't push them away because you don't want them there. It's just you do learn those behaviors when you're growing up, and suddenly when you're trying to learn them when you're an adult, when you've got already your preformed kind of like knowledge and feelings around like emotions and people and what's safe and what's not, it becomes much harder. And I think for me, I was like, okay, cool, I'm gonna have to unpack this, because otherwise this is going to have like a serious long-term impact on my ability to form committed relationships with kind of partners. Friends I can do, I have very few friends, but I can do friends. I think the challenge came in terms of like when having a partner and having that close intimacy, like when it goes, yeah, so it's a hard one. That and again, like therapy is a great thing. Like I think I'm glad that we've been like advocates of therapy, because it's not talked enough, but it really does change your life. So yeah, so that's absolutely brilliant. We kind of covered this at the beginning with some of the things you said, Amy, and I'm going to come back on it, because sometimes, often, adoption is very much filled with narratives around adoptees saying that, adoptees being told, oh, you're so lucky, around the fact that they're adopted, which can sometimes create a pressure for us to feel really grateful, and so and I think I'd really like to know your thoughts in terms of how do you feel about this statement, and would you challenge it or would you welcome it, or it depends which day you ask. Which day we ask you, do you feel lucky to be adopted? Yeah, how do you feel about that kind of conversation? Because that's something that's a lot, you hear it a lot, like children saying are lucky, and like from parents, adopted parents, you still hear it a lot. So I'd really love to hear your thoughts on that.
I would say I have mixed feelings on that statement. On one hand, you know, I do feel lucky. I am grateful for the life that my family were able to give me. I think I've been lucky in my experience, but you know, and there is a narrative around being special, or we chose you, you know, and that's nice, but there's also a flip side to that, you know, and I think that the flip side is not necessarily spoken about as much, but ultimately what that boils down to is that somebody didn't want you, and that's why you're in that position. And yeah, that sort of resonates with me a lot, I think.
That's really deep, because I think sometimes people with adoption, you often talk about what you've gained, but not what you've lost. You talk about that you've gained a family, you've gained security, you've gained all those things, which you do, and adoption does kind of do that. But I think the loss is something, because of how much the gain is kind of more talked about, it means it sometimes creates shame around like feeling really sad or missing the life that you had, whether it was good or bad, or to be honest. So yeah, so thank you so much for sharing that, Amy.
My dreadful American response is fuck off when someone says that to me. So, and it does depend on the day, but I don't think I'm always curious at the psychology behind anyone telling another person you are so anything, because until you know somebody, that statement anyway is a judgment statement, and it's a statement that the other person, how should they respond? You know, it's an unfair statement. You know, it might be better in the question form: do you feel lucky, or do you feel grateful? And then you can actually have a dialogue and a conversation around the concept of it. I feel is a much more, I don't know, fair and even grounded way to address the idea. But my response is always, I didn't ask to be adopted. I didn't ask to be given up. I didn't ask to be shipped across the world to another country and to have the choices made for me. So therefore, why then should I be lucky or grateful? You know, why am I more lucky or more grateful than someone else who was born into their own families? Yeah. So I just, yeah, that's where I'm at.
I would say I'm always taken aback, like when I've been told or asked that. When I was younger, I definitely wouldn't say anything. I would just have stage fright and just not say anything at all. And it definitely would have me in my feelings because I don't know how to respond to that. But now I'm older, I definitely say something, because we're all lucky to be here. We are all lucky to have arms and legs and eyes and so on and so forth. So me being adopted isn't lucky. Again, what Amy and Tara said, like there's always a past, and there's always difficulties that come with adoption. So lucky isn't it at all. And I'll always be grateful as well. So yeah.
Milagros, did you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, not many people ask me if I'm lucky. They want to know more about my, do I know my birth mum? So I get that question, do I know my birth mum? You know, do I know why I was adopted? I can deal with that kind of question because I'm very confident about speaking about my adoption. I kind of used to tell people I was adopted anyway. A lot of it was because I just wanted to educate people about what it means to be adopted. So I don't really take those questions offensively, or I just want to educate people. So so normally I just tell people my experiences, my insights into adoption, and how I see myself today, wherever at that time and place. I cannot deny that I am fortunate to be adopted because in my situation, this is why I don't really tell people necessarily this part of my story, that so I was hospitalized, and so I had malnutrition. So that was an effect of my adoption. So I had to be kind of adopted. So so in that narrative doesn't really play well into, are you lucky? Of course I'm lucky in that respect. But for me, it's more important to focus on what it means to be an adoptee, and what I kind of sort of just turn the question around if I don't like the question. So yeah.
With that, what Milagros brought up about the question, do you know your biological parents? That was one question, just to kind of tag that on the end there, from Daniel to the speakers. Are you in contact with your biological family, and do you have a positive relationship with your adoptive parents?
I have a positive relationship with my adoptive family. I love my family to bits. There's like 10 of us. I feel very, I don't want to use that word lucky, but I kind of do. But I've honestly felt that my parents have really encouraged me to seek beyond of the word adoption. And they really, every time I go to Peru, they're like, yay, go back. They've never discouraged me. They've always want me to be a part of Peru. You know, one of the reasons why they wanted to adopt from Peru was that they had a background about understanding of Peru. So my mom had a PhD in Peruvian politics, so she had like a good awareness and knowledge of the context of Peru. And for her, she said she wanted to adopt from a country that she had knowledge and interest in, and she loved, not just a country that she sort of just picked on the map. So I felt very special that she was really literally chose my country for what Peru was all about. And so I do know my birth family. I met my birth family in 2011, but my mum had passed away, so I never met her. And I think that they didn't know about me. So when I presented myself to my birth family, they had no idea that I'd existed at all. I think when you encounter a birth family that didn't know you existed, the relationship is going to be different. because my birth mum wasn't there to sort of cement the relationship. So I am in contact with them, but I'm not like super close. I'm just really happy that I know my story today, and I know about what part of Peru I'm actually from, and my village, and etc. like that. So yeah, that's kind of me.
Prior to my adoption, I lived with my biological grandparents, and continued to stay in touch with them throughout my life until they passed away. But that was the limit of the contact with my biological family.
I've always known my biological family. I was in contact with my siblings because I had an open adoption. For those of you who don't know, there's an open adoption and a closed adoption. And open adoption can keep you in contact with your family within the UK. I don't know about internationally. And a closed adoption is when the family decide that they don't want the adoptee to be in contact with their biological family. But mine was open. My mum decided that she wanted that for me. She wanted me to know who my siblings were and my aunts and uncles and my grandparents. So yeah, as I got older, I struggled with connecting with my biological family. I found it really difficult. And so now I have contact with them here and there, but not really too much. And my relationship with my adopted family has got a lot better over time as I've got older, because I now appreciate what they've done for me and what the love and support that they've given me continuously, even though I was a little crap and was horrible to them. They still stuck by me. So yeah, I appreciate them a lot more now. So yeah.
I don't know who and have no contact with my biological family. I'll just give you a little bit of an explanation about all of that. So I have names and ages of parents on my forms. When I went to Korea to actually do a search, they found the family of my biological mother's name. But through a long process in DNA testing, we have discovered that I'm actually not related to anyone in that family. So somehow some woman's name got put on my paperwork, and then my biological father's not able to be found. So they don't know, he's not in any registry or anything like that they can find. So I have created my own magical, either, depending on the day, mafia child fantasy story or princess fantasy story about where I'm originally from. There are other avenues I can take in Korea to try to figure out more. Right now, I just don't need to. It's in the back of my mind, but it's not something I feel pressing. And if I do, it will be more probably for curiosity's sake than, kind of this empty space kind of thing. But I love and adore my adoptive family. Like I said, my father is like my guardian angel, and I love my mother, and I have an older brother who is my parents. We don't get along quite as well, but we're siblings. And so, yeah.
Thank you everyone for sharing. There's a question in there from a member of the audience is quite interesting, that covers, as I scroll up, covers about in terms of interracial adoption, whether you have faced racism within your family. and that's probably the best way for me to summarize it. Yeah, so how, in terms of for those who've been placed in interracial adoption, have you, either from your family or from your kind of like immediate communities when you've been growing up, and how has that been for you? That sounds really crass question, but like, how have you navigated that? Or if you haven't experienced anything, that's
Well, my ethnicity is Quechuan, so in terms of like having any discrimination, I feel that like there's not a like I feel like my ethnicity, there's not a lot of us in the UK or London landscape, so there isn't like any like word, like any terminologies that people have said to my face, you know. A lot of people think that I'm Filipino or Indian, but anyway, I feel as though I had maybe 1 or 2 minor incidents at school, but they were really clearly dealt with straight away. I also feel that I went to an international boarding school in England, and we had a lot of people, girls from all around the world. You had Africa, Asia, Europe, a lot, and having being in that environment just enabled me to fit in quite nicely, because I was sort of part of the international crowd. So I think I'm very lucky that my parents are not English, so my parents really were learning to be English just like me. I didn't have like sort of like stress or anxiety that I had to be like a typical English girl. Thanks, you know, so my adoptive family sort of helped me to navigate that kind of like complex, like, who am I? Like, do I need to be English? Do I need to be, who am I? Because they themselves are struggling, because all of my siblings were born in different countries as well. So I felt like my adoptive family understood some of the sort of questions I was having in terms of my identity. But I also feel like I've been very fortunate to have been in different environments where I've always been encouraged to be proud of who I am, that I'm Peruvian, and that I'm adopted. I've always had people who really supported me. So I feel that I'm very blessed to have had those experiences in my life.
Classic on mute. I think that support can really can be a real game changer, to be honest, in terms of how you navigate the good and the challenging experiences. Ebony, sorry, were you about to say something? Did I cut through?
No, it's okay. I was going to say, I can't say that I've faced racism. I would say I faced ignorance. As I said, both my sisters are mixed. So when I would go out with them, or we would go and do something and we would introduce ourselves as siblings, people would always be surprised, or there would be a shock look on their face as to, how are we siblings? Because they're mixed, I'm full black, how does that work? So there's always that. Or like one time there was a silly comment of, oh, you guys have the same nose. And we would look at each other and just be like, we have different noses, but it's okay if that's how you want to relate to this conversation. So yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. It was maybe more, I suppose nowadays we would call it racism, but I wouldn't call it feels too strong to call it racism. There's lots of what now we say is microaggressions, but I think it's a lot of just ignorance. So I grew up on a blueberry farm in rural Oregon. So everyone, the only Asian ethnicity anyone knew was Chinese. So I got called Chinese Tara all the time, which drove me mad. But that's just the way it was. The only things I think that I would face was like my brother. So he's 5 years older than me. We'd go to the mall together, and I had to walk he would say, walk 5 paces behind me, because he didn't want people to think that I was his girlfriend, because obviously no one would believe that we were brother and sister. Or as, you know, I was always the exchange student. When we go out to restaurants and we order something, people would look at my father and say, what does she want? And my dad would look at me and say, well, what do you want? And then, you know, there was that moment of embarrassment as, oh, she speaks English fluently. You know, I would be told that I speak English really well, and I'd say, well, thank you, I grew up down the street, kind of thing. And as an adult, I would say the most kind of shocking thing is that when I have gone home and had dinner with my dad, and people think he's my husband. And that's always kind of like, wait, what? So there's things like that, but I don't take them as racism per se. I feel it's a little bit too strong to call that racist. I just feel it's a lack of experience, exposure, knowledge. I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you for everyone's input on that. That's yeah, thank you. It's very interesting. I think talking about race within adoption and how those conversations are done, and I think it's interesting, Tara, that you're like, I wouldn't quite call it racism, because I think if you were to put it in the context of today, it would be labelled as racism as clear as day. But I think sometimes when we're growing up and it nearly becomes our norm, that we're just like, oh, it's just a thing that happens, and like it's kind of not really pleasant. But we just don't put that name to it as we would if we were like someone was to treat you like that today. You'd be like, hold up, that's really not like uncool. We have a question from the audience. I think it's quite interesting. So this is going to be for everyone. What do you think adoptive families commonly do wrong or badly, and what advice would you give us? That's quite, I think I want to spin that to also reflect of things that you've experienced within your families that have gone really well and have had a really positive impact. Because I think I don't want to just focus on the like, this is what you must not do, because I think sometimes it's quite hard. But I think also about what are the good, what's kind of like good practice within adoption, because I think those things are also very important. So what do you feel are things that adoptive families commonly do wrong, but also experiences that you've gone through that really have made a difference to you as an adoptee?
I wouldn't, parenting is hard in general, so there isn't anything you can do wrong. I think it's always just an education and learning thing. I would say for adoptee parents, never be embarrassed to say that you have an adopted child, or just say that that's your child. My mum, when we would go out and she would see someone that she knew, she would have to pull that person to the side and tell them that I was adopted, and then that conversation would be very awkward for me and that person, because the first look on their face is a sorry look, instead of just having a standard conversation with a child. So never be embarrassed of just saying that's my child and just being happy with that, and always having conversations about adoption, or asking them how they feel about being adopted is always quite good, just to ease them, how they feel. Yeah, that's all I can think of at the moment.
Thank you for that, Ebony. Did any other members of the panel have any contributions they'd like to add?
I think Ebony summed it up quite well. I mean, parenting is difficult, and you know, the experience between yourself and your child it's unique. There is no book, there's no manual. Well, I know people have written books, but just you have to do what's right for you as a family. And I'd say when you do get it right, I mean, I don't describe my parents as my adopted family. They're my family, and that's always been the case. There's always been a conversation about I am adopted. It's never been a secret, but they're my family. That's it. That's all I've known.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. I think as obviously not looking like my family, probably the most common thing I hear, and maybe the worst comment that was ever said is, we don't see you as not being white, or you're just one of us. And I think that it kind of dismisses the fact that I clearly don't look like them. I know it was meant in love, so I wasn't offended by it, but it wasn't until later that I kind of thought, well, why would they say that? And yes, I am part of the family, but I should still be acknowledged as the fact that I'm not a white person in a white family. But I would say kind of let the child lead you. I mean, I think that if a kid wants to talk about being adopted, talk about it. If they don't, be open and available is, I think, the best thing. Like, my dad never brought it up, but if I did, we talked about it. We talked about it until I was done talking about it. And he would give his view of it. And then we would discuss those views very openly. My mom, on the other hand, didn't want to talk about it. I mean, it's not like you could hide it, but she wasn't as involved. And so now it's a little bit, she's much more, like when I was searching, she definitely wanted to be involved in it, which surprised me. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm not a parent just because I think it's too complicated. but I think I would, as a teacher, I think that you just let kids know what they need and what they want. That's the best I can offer.
So regards to the advice I'd give you, so I'm speaking from a transracial international adoptee perspective. So when I reflect on how I feel about how my parents raised us, I would say that always respect and love the origins of of the adoptee's background. Try to engage in it, not in a forced way, but in a very loving and normal way. If you're thinking about adopting from internationally, you really need to think about what country you choose is really, really a big part of that's going to be the experience, our life experience. So think carefully about why you want to adopt from that country. Don't think because it's the easiest, because I heard someone was adopting from that. Really reflect on thinking about what is it that you want, what kind of experience you want to create for your adoptive child. I think always encourage the child to be aware of themselves, sort of thing, like wherever they are, what the context, so allow them to embrace their adoptive country as they wish. Don't rush it. Always be like, try to be like 2 steps ahead. So for example, searching, try to read up on like people's experiences of searching within their birth country. Try to sort of do as much background reading as you can, so that you can prepare your child as as the needs must be. But just I think it is difficult raising an adoptive family. I did see that one of the questions was like, how do you raise like biological siblings and adoptive siblings? Like, how do you do the mix together? And that's really hard, I think. I have 4. There's like 6. No, there's like 5. I'm thinking about my family. There's 5 five biological children and a couple of adopted children. And and that's quite a bit of a mix to have, but I think my parents always thought, like, we have to give them the same opportunities of their life experiences. But I also think that parenting is different. When you parent adopt a child, is completely different because they've had traumas, they've had large parts of their history missing, or they may not know of it. So they need to be like parenting in a very different type of way. Whereas their biological children, they're more secure about who they are. They don't have the kind of questions that adopted children have, and so they may have it's not the same kind of experience even within the same adoptive family. It's just not going to be the same way. So reflect upon that.
Thank you so much for that, Managos. I think you touched upon, I think you mentioned it, we touched upon one of the questions that came up about kind of I don't know if you call it a blended family, I don't know what the right word for it is, when you have both kind of like biological children and adopted children, and how that works. Like, I have that within my family, and it has been like, I love my sister to bits, like she's like my world, but also it has created sometimes some differences in terms of, because there's a very different process you go through when you go through adoption. I think my sister came much later, and I had always been told that, we adopted you because we couldn't have children, and you were kind of like miracle children in some way. And then I think for later down the line, to have a biological child to come into the picture, it can be sometimes quite destabilizing. So I think if I was giving advice, is the importance of, as the panel have said, about having really open conversations with your children as much as possible, because those I think it's always better if you're able to discuss this within your family unit, rather than, it's not to not discuss it outside, but I think you can get the best answers from inside the family unit sometimes in terms of those emotions. There's a question in from the audience, if anyone in the panel is within a same-sex adoptive family, and about their if they have any experiences that they would like to share on that.
Unfortunately, I'm not, so yeah, can't answer.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I thought I'd just ask it.
We had another question from Daniel Louise. He said about life story work, and I never heard this before. Daniel explains that life story work is around the children's past, where the children have come from and why they are removed from the birth family, their life going forward and people involved, and that it's a way of supporting their children. And it's Agatha also added that it can be the form of a book, box with pictures, dates, keepsakes from the children's past, and lots of conversations. And Daniel also says it's something that's normally provided by the removing authority to support children going into adoption. So to the speakers, have you had anything that sounds like life story work?
Yes, I have had that. Mine, I haven't really looked at it since I'm older, but when I was younger, I always had the opportunity. And then I was given a little book, and it was like a duckling book, and it just explains in child terms of what a duck being taken in by a family, and basically being adopted. So I had that, and then my family decided for me to have my own book and create like pictures of leading up to adoption. So from being in care, from my foster carers to being adopted, to going to court, to everything, like the whole journey. So I've had that, and I would say it's helped, just for my own memory's sake, to remember what has happened, only because I don't remember my younger years that well. I only remember being taken away. I don't remember anything else. So it's a great thing to have.
Yeah, same. When I was adopted from my second family I was put into a foster family, and then I was adopted with my family now. And in between that time, my social worker helped me put together a book. And I mean, I was 8, so it was like doing school worksheets. I don't know, like, what do I want to be in the future? What do I remember from the past? I remember, like, I hand wrote a letter to my second adoptive mother, who was very abusive. So I was able to express my angst towards her because I was removed from that situation. It was also the first time I saw some pictures from my previous families, because similarly to what Ebony was saying, I didn't remember being in those families. And so I had, from my first adoptive family, I had memories of being really happy at certain periods, but I didn't know where that came from. But then it turned out that because of this book, I had a picture of my foster mother, who I was given to kind of as an in-between person. And it was actually with her that I was the most happy, because I saw this picture. It's my only picture where I have a not canned adoption smile. That it was very natural. I was very naturally happy with this woman who I had no recollection of. And I eventually found her through Facebook, and was able to meet her and go through kind of the memories that I had. And they actually were from her, not from my first family. So I would say that book it goes with me everywhere around the world. Like, every time I move, it comes with me in my luggage. It does not go with boxes being shipped. So, yeah.
I don't have a book. When I was adopted, I didn't have any really information about anything about where I came from. All I had was 3 pieces of paper, my adoption record. That's all I had. So that is my book. That is my story. That for me, I am familiar with those life story books, and I really wish I had one. So as the years have gone by, I've sort of like created one. I've made my own one today, because now I can do that. I can have pictures of me, back in my birth country, pictures with me with my birth family today, when I met them, pictures of me, in my different stages of adoption journey. But essentially, those first 3 pages of my life are the ones that really formed my experiences. It's sort of like, it was like a catalyst of what my adoption experience would be like, a sense of like searching for a sense of belonging. And so for me, my adoption papers are so precious to me. They are my life, they are my history. They are the ones that I used to read when I was like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Like, it was the first sense of the only thing reference to my history, and the only thing directly from Peru. So that had such an important part of my story. And it's something that I always have with me. Wherever I go, I kind of like make sure they're okay. Because I don't know, right? I'm just like really keepsake. I'll never lose those. But yeah.
Thank you everyone for sharing. And I've got my own kind of like massive adoption file that I've kept, and I don't look at it now because sometimes it's a bit emotional, but I think it's nice to have that sense of like in black and white of who you are and your identity, and a sense of like roots and things. I am I think the kind of final 2 questions. Just because in the essence of time runs away with this when you can have a comfortable sit-down conversations. But so this next question is going to be focused on how important do you think it is for children to be adopted into a family that reflects their cultural or racial background, and how has your experience been with this? open to anyone to start off the conversation, to start the response. Do you think it makes a difference, or is it down to, if you're in a loving family, then that's all that matters? Or is it that later down the line, actually, sometimes there can be challenges if a black child is placed in a white family, or does it, yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts.
I would say for me, well, it helped, but at the same time, like, there's always got to be an education there and an understanding. So my biological family are from Guyana. My adopted family are from St. Lucia / Jamaica. But there was never a conversation about my Guyanese roots. So I don't know much about Guyana, only from what I've gone to search and learn about. So as long as there's some type of education and research and understanding, then it's fine whether you adopt internationally or within your own race. As long as there's an understanding there, then it's great. But yeah, love and support and everything else plays a massive part into it, and everyone plays a massive circle. So
I was just going to say, I can only speak from my own experience, and I was adopted into a family that looked like me and sound like me, so I can't speak to other experiences. And I guess to the outside world, there was never really any distinction. So we've never had to. I'm sure. When I was very small, my parents would have been asked questions because, you know, suddenly they had a 9-month-old and there hadn't been a pregnancy. But as a child, I was never faced with sort of awkward questions, and we never, as a family, had to make sort of any explanation. So that's my experience.
Being an adoptee is a lifelong journey. It is always going to be with you, and I think sometimes parents, I think sometimes parents think it's going to sort of end. It's going to sort of, oh, you're going to just sort of finish that kind of process. But for me, it's always like a lifelong process. So I think for parents to understand that. It's a bit like hit and miss in a sense, because you don't really know how the child is going to be, how they're going to develop, how they're going to engage in their adoption journey. You just have to be with them all that through the process. So that's why I think adopting from a country that you really actually love, that you really actually understand, and that you really actually feel a connection to that country matters so much. I can only speak from my experience that I feel that my parents both had visited Peru twice before they adopted me, and my mum had lived in Peru for a year. And obviously she's not Peruvian, yes, she's white, but I think that for me, that allowed me to develop my sense of identity in a way that was as best as it could be, given that my family are white. So they encouraged me to go back to Peru. They encouraged me to be proud of who I look. And in that, as an adult, I reflect and I think that was a positive experience. So I'm more, I would say the parents really need to be, it really does depend upon the parents' experience, what kind of outcomes they want, really. I mean, my parents just wanted me to be happy and to have a connection with Peru, in a sense. That was really important for them, that I didn't really forget about my roots. Coming from that angle, I felt like not pressured, but I was more inclined to go down that route in a very positive manner. But I know, but there's so many dynamics intertwined in all of that. So I don't know if it's such an easy question sort of to answer. and also there's another thing about like, okay, so what does it mean to be, there's more like, so if I was adopted in America, you know, I would have sort of like a question in my mind, like, well, I know what a Latino American is supposed to be like, but you know, but wasn't raised in a Latino family in United States, but there's no such understanding of what it means to be a Latino in England. It's a very new concept. So for me, being a Latin American Andean adoptee, I felt like I had no constraints of who, like no like measured of expectations of how I might turn out, because society wasn't really telling me what it should be like as a Peruvian adoptee. I'm the first, and there's very few Latin American, brown Latin Americans within the context of London at that time. So I felt very flexible about who I wanted to be. So I think one has to think about the context, you know, the location of where you're adopted, your adoptive family, all of those things sort of impact on whether I, you know, if I think it's a good thing or a bad thing, kind of thing.
Thank you for sharing that. I understand that most of our questions aren't that none of our questions that we've asked today are straightforward, have straightforward answers. So, but yeah, thank you for that kind of really kind of comprehensive answer. I'm going to ask the final question to close our session today, and I feel like we've answered the questions from the audience as we've went along. But what is one thing that you would say to your childhood self? Because I think sometimes that I've had it once I've become an adult that that I think there's those things I'd love to say to my child self, but I'd really like to now, as you've all gone through that journey in terms of identity and soul searching and sense of self. And so would there, yeah, what would you say? What would you say to your childhood self if you could if you could say one thing?
I would say wait for it, because it gets better. I don't at all miss youth. I love being an adult. I love being in my 40s. It just, everything gets better because we can understand ourselves better. And, you know, I think that you just got to get through it. I mean, that's, it just gets better. That's all I can say.
I would say the same. As well as time heals. Don't be afraid of being adopted. Don't be afraid of the conversation. Just enjoy. Just be happy. Be young. Don't worry about what people have to say or anything like that. Just really enjoy the experience. And things get better. Things always get better, but it gets better, and you're going to be happy at the end of it. So don't worry.
I would echo those sentiments entirely. And yeah, I'd also say that the experience of being adopted, it doesn't have to define you. As I said earlier, it's one piece of the puzzle that makes up who you are.
I would just say keep going. It's an amazing adventure. It like everyone says, with time it gets better. But I would honestly say, for me, like, be more, I would say, I would probably appreciate the people that were around me more as a childhood, because I got a lot of support. And yeah, and I feel very thankful for that.
Thank you so much to all of you for sharing your experiences, for taking the time out of your weekends, and for I don't know if Grace, if you want to add a few words for closing before we end today's event. But this isn't the end. There's more to come, but this is the close of today's Zoom panel. Grace, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to say everything that all of our speakers have said have really resonated with me. They are different. Yeah, I can totally see, you know, where they're coming from. I also would like to say to the adoptive parents or the people who are thinking of adopting, thank you for being here and taking the time to listen. That really is the first step forward on your children's or your child's adoptive journey. So yes, I think you're making a really good decision listening to Adoptees, which is something that I am just incredibly thankful that you're doing for the sake of your children or your child, really. Yeah, I'm just so glad that this can happen, and especially during National Adoption Month, really.
Yeah. And this is we're having 3 more events, but this is going on to Instagram this time around for Instagram lives on Louise_GW, and we're going to be doing one-to-one conversations with 3 other speakers, where it'll be a very different kind of conversations, because obviously it'll be a one-to-one conversation, and I really hope that you're able to join us and keep having the conversation around, but in terms of really understanding the experience of adoptees. I feel like this closes us for today, and again, on behalf of me and Grace, would like to say thank you to our speakers, and thank you again for everyone who has tuned in to listen. This will be recorded and shared in the next week, but yeah, thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your weekends.